Hey everybody, I'm up here in New Hampshire. It's a little chilly today. I actually have my fire going because it is a little cold. It's October, and I wanted to. Well, actually, sorry, it's September 25th, so I think I'm already in October mindset. But it's a little chilly day, and I wanted to record a video from start to finish. I wanted to throw you everything I could do. My other typography video is pretty popular, and it's a long video. This one's about an hour long, so it's half as long as my original typography video. But this one goes through the whole thing from start to finish, and you're going to learn a ton of stuff all the way through. I really tried to work on really getting at the core of designing this type of fixed weight new Gothic type of font. And I broke it up into 3 sections. And I could have made 3 videos of it, but the other one was popular, and I like when videos just show you everything. You can fast forward and rewind, do whatever you want, but really it's broken up into 3 sections, which is discovery, excuse me, discovery, refinement, and then experimentation. So the discovery stage is when I've drawn it out and I've scanned it in, and I kind of ink everything in with the pen tool, and I walk you through the whole process of me doing that. And then refinement is, the kerning, leading, really trying to make the font look good and organic and fit together. And then experimentation, which is my favorite part, which is once you've done the whole thing, you get to kind of play around with the words, ligatures, maybe make the look of the feel a little bit different. So as you can see, the thumbnail will show you what it actually looks like, but I'm going to go from, honestly, the beginning of this to nothing all the way to the end. And you get to kind of sit in my studio over my shoulder and listen to me talk. I'm sorry you get to listen to my dumb voice for that period of time. Morgan Freeman didn't return any of my phone calls. Hopefully you will next time, because I don't like talking very much. But if you are interested in this, totally cool. If not, just go ahead and fast forward through it. I don't mind. It doesn't hurt my feelings at all. But keep in mind, I'll go through the whole process, and I hope you enjoy it. And thanks for watching. If you subscribe, I'm going to be doing a lot more of these videos, and that would be really cool for you to do that, to not miss out on any stupid content that I make. Thanks. Bye. So let's dive into this. As you can see, I'm setting it up exactly the same way that I always do. And if you watched any of my other type videos, you can see really simple, just a simple drawing on a piece of paper. It doesn't even look good. So, I mean, if you're thinking, oh man, I can't draw this well, don't worry, really. You can fix a lot of the way that it looks in Illustrator. And that's what's really going to help you here. It's clean lines, it's that heavy black really helps. It's a classic illustration style of putting acetate over an image and inking it in, and that's exactly how I do this. I am not classically trained to illustrate, but I loved comics as a kid, and this is how I kind of learned how to do this style. And again, it just comes with time, just kind of seeing what works, what doesn't. You're probably noticing that I don't use any grids, and that's kind of the first thing I wanted to talk about. I personally don't use grids. I don't like the way it feels when I'm doing type. I do them for other things. When I'm doing layouts, I like using grids or using golden ratio for things. But for the most part, when I'm doing type, and I know a lot of people, that bucks the tradition of this. For a lot of type designers, they're like, what? He's not using grids? I just feel like it works a lot better for me if I don't. As you can see, I use guides, so I'll use horizontal, vertical guides to really help me get the widths of each font really down really well. But for the most part, I don't use any grids at all when I'm doing type. And that might change, but for right now, I just like the way that it feels. And that's just my personal preference. This is a modern kind of Gothic font, and everything's a fixed width in here. So I like doing those fonts for a lot of reasons. For me, they're just a lot more fun, and I like just kind of figuring them out. you know, I mean, fixed width, you know, they are a little bit easier. I'm not gonna lie, they are, just because you're not worrying so much about align weights, because a lot of times what happens is a line weight in an A is another example, or a W. You're going to have to fix a lot of those things, and so sometimes it's a little bit easier just to, if you are starting with type design, I would definitely recommend this style first. It is pretty easy to get a hang of if you just want to take some time and really kind of learn it, and it's, for me, it's probably the easiest way of designing type. Besides maybe a sans serif that is really simple as well, but you know, can be complicated too. I'm not trying to down sans. I'm not trying to, you know, tell you that you can't or that they're not complicated sometimes. But I think if you're really starting out doing type design, this would be a really great way to start. So again, I'm just kind of pretending like you're standing over my shoulder and I'm talking to you. I don't ever want to feel like I'm being pretentious or, you know, kind of gimmicky. That's not really my thing. I personally just really want, if you were sitting in the office with me and you said, hey, can you show me how you design type? This is how I do it. I know it's not for everyone, so if this isn't your thing, go ahead and fast forward, and that's totally cool. But a little bit of my background, I did work as a carpenter for a summer, and I think this is where I get this technique of doing this type of work, where I am lining everything up, and then what I like to call is just cutting it out. So as you can see, I'm using the eraser, and I'm just cutting out certain sides of this, and again, you can see all those shapes when I hit it, when I click it, the guides show up, and see how it's just kind of a mess. This is why this stage is, you know, for me, called the discovery, because I'm really just kind of figuring it out. I'm trying to see if that shape will work really well, and if it won't, and mirroring and copying and pasting, that's all just in the discovery. I'm just trying to see if this is something that'll work. And again, you see how I'm just like, I deleted it and I was like, oh, I kind of like it. So that's just my way of doing it. It's the way my brain works. If it helps you, cool. It, to me, it's a cool technique of how, you know, your brain might not always work the way that a teacher will tell you. You know, so that there is other ways of thinking about things. Don't always just settle because someone told you that this is a norm or this is the only way to do things. I was never taught how to do type design, and I get contracted to do type design all the time now. I don't have any experience other than me sitting there and doing this for hours and hours and hours until I kind of figured it out. So don't be afraid. You know, take your time. It's not something that's super easy. Letter forms are really hard and calligraphy is really hard, but pick up some books. You know, there are some great old school lettering books that you can breeze through and gives you really great inspiration for doing this type of stuff. So ease are fun. I love doing ease personally, especially in this style. Um, as you can see, I created a certain way and I used the guides, but you'll see what happens next, which is as you're looking at this, my eyeball can see that that center E line needs to be changed. And I'm about to show you how I do that in a second. And I just move it down and it completes it, and it really makes it look really nice. But keep in mind, you know, that's necessarily isn't something that comes from you being taught that. That really just comes from me doing it a lot over and over again, looking at other letter forms and understanding those shapes. So really those type books that I bought, you know, 15 years ago, you know, really helped because it shows you how the masters did it and how, you know, through all the you know, through the 1800s 1900s, how they created fonts. And so really looking through that stuff helps a lot. So don't underestimate that. Don't always just go on Pinterest. There are some really great books that I use. Dan X Solo does has a bunch of series of books that are really helpful, display fonts. And again, use the white icon, and this is what I'm about to show you. Use the white arrow and just select the ones that you need. And watch this. Slide. Boop. Simple as that, you know. But wow, does that make that form look a lot nicer just from doing that one simple thing? And honestly, that probably would have took me a year to figure out. It's one of those things where you might understand the basic concepts of fonts, but you really do need to just sit there and work on them with your, with your eyes to get a real good grasp of them, and look at other people's work and understand what they're doing too. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to really wonder, and I suggest this to people. Copy other people's work. It really does help. Don't use it as client work. And then let me be very clear. I'm not telling you to copy other people's works and sell it, but if you want to learn how to do type, look at my type and sit there with the pen tool and copy it out. It'll really help you understand how I created it if you learn how to create it yourself. And that's a technique that's been used for illustrators for since illustrators existed. So keep that in mind. This is another technique where I use actual shapes. So obviously I'm taking both of those circles, and I know that the fixed width needs to be a certain, and using the outline is really, really important too, because it really helps you get a sense of perspective without kind of getting bogged down with what's happening there. So if you hit Command Y on your keyboard in Illustrator, you pop right into outline, and I use that constantly. So you just use the two circles and it creates a perfect curve, and that's really helpful. So you can do that for a lot of things. Brand designers use it all the time to create a finished logos, to use finished squares, circles, triangles to create perfect angles. And I just use it for my letter forms, and it's another classic technique for creating perfect angles and really clean lines. So as you can see, I'm still kind of doing the same thing. I mean, this, I don't mind talking, and I hope you're getting enough information from this where it does make sense. But a lot of this is duplicating. A lot of this is just figuring it out. And as you can see, I'm starting the O right now in Reformation, and obviously that angle didn't work. So I'm coming in here with, again, two circles, and I'm gonna do the same thing. Make sure the width of both of those is the same, and all you do that is take a square, and I'm cutting out basically the sides of that circle that I don't need anymore. So just line it up with the other side, and then go ahead and subtract the rest, and that's all you need to do. There isn't a special tool for that. You just, again, I think it comes from me being a carpenter and cutting wood all the time, and it just came from that. And I love, being able to slice right through things and then just duplicate them and throw them on the other side, and they're exactly the same and symmetrical. Again, direct select. Arrows are really, really nice. Merging them is nice. Just learn the technical knowledge of these things, and you'll get it pretty quickly once you start really experimenting with each individual tool in Illustrator. So I'm bringing over the A. I liked that curve of the O, and so I thought, this is gonna look nice on the A. Now I could have done the A two different ways, which is a perfect symmetrical A, where I cut it down the middle, and the symmetry of it looks nice. But I knew that would have been something that everyone would have seen, so I thought, this might look nice if I use that curve of the O in there, and I think it comes out really nice. So, another thing, a great thing to keep in mind is, the shapes and negative space are really, really important with type, and it's not to be overlooked. It really, really isn't. So, as you can see, I like to curve, things really well and make them feel really organic and clean. I think a lot of clients come to me for really clean type that looks really, really nice, blown up. I'm not really, I can do the grungy stuff too, but I think the majority of the stuff that I do is people really are interested in the clean type. and that's what I get a lot of interest in. So that's why I wanted to do this video, to kind of show you the tips and tricks that I use. Again, creating a T is pretty simple. You know, this isn't rocket science, but it does take time to kind of figure this stuff out and figure the short keys. I use copy and paste constantly, so if you're not using those, get ready to start using. Duplicate's really great too. But you know, I mean, I'm cutting those things in, and don't be, you know, don't be too cut up about how it might not look perfectly at first. You know, I mean, and like this file is a mess right now, and I know the next stage of refinement I'm going to fix a lot of this stuff, but I just kind of want to get the general idea of this font and how it should look and the feel that you're going to have with it. And as you can see here, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just kind of erasing around and using the outline and looking at it, and I like the way that it looks, but unfortunately it just didn't quite kind of fit with the whole thing. And so, I mean, you can see, I mean, I know at this point that I don't like this, and I actually almost gave up. I almost was like, this isn't really working. I don't really like it. I love the E, the R, and the W, but there were aspects of it that I didn't like. But sometimes when that happens, you just kind of keep pushing, and you get through that creative block that's just sitting there like like a brick on the top of your skull, and you just keep pushing. And I've always found when I don't like something, if I keep if I keep going down that road with it, I always end up with something good. You know, just because you learn through the mistakes. So this is another technique of kind of cutting those in. Again, putting a white space, a white shape over that dark. You're not really destroying anything, but you get to kind of see what it looks like. And that's all I'm trying to do here. I like this a lot more. And again, cutting in those shapes. Oh yeah, that curve looks really nice. And duplicating that every single time. Moving that that weird like cutout curve. It looks like a jigsawed piece of wood around on top of that. Really gives you the angles that are a little bit different. And again, I'm not copying anyone's work. I'm not doing anything. I'm just kind of discovering it on my own. Now that N looks really nice, and that T looks a lot nicer now. And so you can see I use guides in a way of like I have that back shape and then that top curve, so that I know the exact same space every single time you go down the line. And that's just, again, it's just some little technique that I do to keep that for me. It doesn't mean that you have to do it that way, but it can help sometimes if you're trying to make sure that all your lines are exactly the same. So again, you can see I'm just kind of pulling that line out a little bit farther, and it really does help if you're just kind of taking your time. Don't get frustrated. You can do it. Don't worry. Not to sound like a crazy motivational speaker when I'm doing these, but I do see a lot of people get really frustrated with it and they just want to give up. And I've been there too. I really have. It stinks. So the eye there was a kind of cool concept, which was, you know, usually what you do is you'll split those serifs and it'll kind of look, you know, you make a Times New Roman kind of eye, or a Greek kind of eye. And I didn't want to do that this time, and I wanted to move those curves around, so that's how that one kind of developed. And there are things about this that I don't like, but it's starting to take shape, you know, and for me I can see the good things coming out of this. Those curves are looking really nice, and so I want to pull that curve out. So just make, again, it comes from doing physical things. I'm making a negative there. Okay, so that if that shape goes into that, then the negative is going to fall into that, and I didn't like it, and so it really is about experimenting, discovering the things that you're going to like about this font, dislike about it. I am going to do another video where I kind of show you the ligatures connecting and how to connect words together and letter forms together. This one, I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to show you kind of the basic fixed with modern Gothic font and how I would create it. And so, you know, I mean, you can see me kind of pulling that in there, and I kind of had that idea while I was working it to have these connect and flow together. But at the end, I thought, well, it might be nice to do maybe a shorter video about this. And again, I'm just trying to pull you along with me. And so, but you know, keep in mind negative space is really, really important too. So that's another huge point that you really gotta keep in mind. I see this problem happen a lot with a lot of potential type designers, where they can't quite figure things out, and I wish I could just sit over their shoulder and kind of gently nudge them into certain areas. But I can see problems with type really quickly, and a lot of it has to do with negative space. And if you don't know what negative space is, it's basically the space that, if you're looking at this screen, it's the white that's on that background, and that is negative space. It's the space that isn't taken up by the object that's right in front of you. And keep in mind, you know, consistency when you're doing these types of fonts is really important. And to be fair, it's not even these types of fonts. Just consistency of line weights can really, really help the look. You know, if you're doing more calligraphy or a script font, you're going to want line variance, and that is a whole different thing, and I'm happy to do another video about script fonts, because that's a lot of fun too, and I love doing those. But just keep in mind when you're doing these, you know, it's really important to make sure that you don't have a bunch of different line weights. You know, especially with the center of that A, the ligature that goes in the center of the A. If that was really, really small, it would look really weird. And sometimes you can get away with it, but really try to make them as consistent as possible. And it'll really make your line weights feel great, and it'll make the font really kind of refined and have a really nice organic feel to it. So I'm going to start working on this T here. I hated the way that it looked, because as you can see with the rest of the font, I got these nice sharp edges that are kind of flowing, and for me it feels really nice with a fixed width like that, because it makes it look really, really, really tight. And so I'm looking at that T, and it just doesn't quite work. So right now what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out how I can make the T look a little bit nicer. And again, just comes from practice, just trying to figure out what's going to look really nice. So right now I'm trying to see the space between the top of that the top line, and I'm trying to make sure that it has the same consistency. Again, just consistency is really going to help you with your fonts. If I could give any advice to anyone just off the cuff, it would be make sure that you have really consistent lines. So I'm using that same curve, as you can see, from the, you know, the initial eye shape, right? And I'm just cutting that out, dragging it over, merging the whole thing, and boom, I have my nice shape. I like the way that looks as a T instead of having those drop downs on both sides that kind of curve in. And it looks a lot nicer, and it looks like it fits with that. That T stands out in my head like crazy. So when I did that, I was like, oh yeah, yep, that's obviously exactly what I needed to do. So again, there's some problems here, and as you can see, the N doesn't line up, so I'm going to move that over, and I'm going to see if I can actually put that curve into there. And obviously you can see that didn't work. So I'm like, okay, well that doesn't work, so let's figure out why. Let's figure out how I can make that work. And again, you know, I mean, just now that I see how this works, and those fonts are kind of, you know, those letter forms are really starting to come together for me, I just want to keep moving the rest of the word, the Reformation word down. And this isn't, you know, keep in mind, I'm not pushing any agenda with this. It just simply was recording this. So and just like I said, I see how I'm using merge. Merge is going to become your best friend. Merge and like the eraser tool when you're doing fonts, for me, really helps. So again, keep your points really tight, and make sure that you're not and I'll show you in the next stage, which is like refinement, how to kind of simplify a lot of those forms. But right now we're just in discovery, and we're just playing around. We're seeing what works, what doesn't work. And this is a lot like when you create logos. It's exactly the same process. Draplin, Aaron Draplin does a thing which I kind of love, which he's like, vectors are free. And it's right. That's why I love doing Illustrator work. Adobe Illustrator is really, really important to this particular type of work. And you can use font software. I use it too. I personally just like designing type in Illustrator. It feels natural to me. I did a lot of work when I first started designing in Illustrator, and I just continue to do it. I do different things now, but when I started, I would spend hours and hours on Illustrator just pining with the pen tool, figuring things out. And now I can do complete illustrations with just the pen tool. And it really is helpful for me, and I love that graphic style. I grew up with skateboards, and so it really informed my personal style when it comes to this type of graphics. So as you can see, I took that eye, and right now what I'm doing is I'm turning it a little to match that exact curve. And I want to make sure that curve, if you stroked the eye out with white, you can do it that way too. Stroke it out, and that curve will be perfect. But I just kind of did it this way because I knew that I could do it quickly that way, and I like that curve a lot more. I think it fit a lot better on that T. So now I'm just kind of checking, and I'm making sure it kind of works everywhere. And just take that whole letter form, the whole T, and I sent it all the way back. And if you're thinking about the layers, I just sent it all the way to the back. And again, I'm kind of assuming that if you're watching this, you know a few things in Illustrator. You might not know everything, but I don't want to get bogged down with telling you how to do every little tiny thing in Illustrator. If you don't know how to send something back, just Google it, and you can come up pretty quick. But see how that T is really kind of making that shape makes it a lot nicer, and you can kind of line those letters up a little bit nicer. And that's what I mean about duplication. It really is important to create consistency, and those shapes are all consistent, so you want to keep that going. And I'm starting to really dig this font at this point. I kind of started this not really knowing where I was going with it, but I'm starting to really like it. And so that's pushing through the kind of initial steps of I don't like it, it might not work. I can tell you right now in my head, I know that W is going to change. I'm already like, I don't like it, but I know for sure that I can change it in the next phase. And again, see how I'm just kind of placing the letters in there? Don't worry at this stage too much about kerning and letting, or tracking. Sometimes people call it tracking. And so, keep in mind that, well, I guess if you don't know what letting and kerning is, let me tell you. So letting is the kind of up and down space between letter forms. So if you type out a sentence and the paragraphs are either double spaced or single spaced, that is what letting is. And that's an old term. You can look it up. It's actually has to do with actually physically printing. And they'd put letting spaces in there when they print. And then kerning is the space between the letters, and that's horizontally. So that's between the two E's. And you want to bring it closer together or farther apart. A lot of modern typefaces pull that letting really far apart, and it gives it kind of a modernistic look. I don't love doing that. I do it in layout sometimes, but when I'm doing these kind of custom typefaces, that's how it works. And again, duplicating is super important. Remember, I just grabbed that A and I slid it over there, and then I kind of just cut some things out of it, and boom, you kind of have a K. So remember, duplicating things that you've already created, number one, saves you time, which then saves you ultimately they save you money, because really what you're doing is you're saving, your client time, and you're saving yourself from redoing each individual letter. This is kind of just a quick trick for the designers that are doing this. It really does help, and to me, it's not, you're not, trying to sell your client that the fact that you can do it really fast, but it does help when you're trying to do a lot of this stuff in a short period of time. So it can help quite a bit. So as you can see, we're still doing the same thing. I'm just pulling out those letters. Oh, we need an end. Let me slide that down and hold shift. By the way, if you don't know a few things, hold shift while you're sliding it down. It'll keep it right on that same line. And we're gonna create a D, and D's are pretty easy when you already have this shape kind of all ready to go. But again, slice it in the middle with the eraser, flip and rotate that little bugger, and there you go. You got yourself a D. Again, don't worry about all the anchor points. You do want to worry about if they're not lining up properly, which they didn't, so that's why I recut it a little bit higher. And then I did the same thing, duplicate, rotate, and drag it on down. And see how I line it up with the bottom there? And what I'm going to do is just use again, direct select, highlight those, and slide them on down. And there you go. And then you have a D. And again, don't worry about the kerning. Just try to get them in place. We're gonna worry about all that later, and you really want to use your eyeball. And now we're kind of done. We're done with all the letter forms, and I'm just kind of looking at it now, and I'm like, this looks pretty good. I like it. And so far, I'm thinking this is a solid, experiment. So now what I'm doing is I'm copying it. I'm gonna create a new document, throw it in the new document, and just the whole thing all together. And I drag it out. I drag the artboard out, but you don't have to do that. You can do it a bunch of different ways. You can use the gray background or a white background, depending on your settings in Illustrator too. I certainly am not saying that you have to do it that way. But now we created a new document, and again, the importance of layers is really kind of key here. Again, I'm going to tackle that W now because I knew I hated it, and I want to figure out how to make it look a lot nicer. So I don't really love the one-sidedness, and I love the symmetry of this font so far. So I figured, well, why don't we create a custom shape, like maybe a little spear in the center of that might look kind of nice. So that's what I'm doing right now, and it's all on the fly. I mean, don't copy other people's work and throw it in there. Just try it out. These shapes are pretty easy. Vectors are free. Take your time. And right now I'm doing it in white so I can see the length that it needs to be on the background there, and hopefully it works. And I'm liking just the way that it shapes. And you see me kind of using the bounding box there, and I'm just kind of pulling it, to each side, which is perfectly fine. Again, this font worked absolutely fine, so there's nothing wrong with this. But it just takes time to understand how the pen tool works, and as I'm looking at it, and again, negative space. So that, as you can see on the top of that W, the negative space is a little strange. So what I'm going to do is double check that space there and make sure it works. And then I decided, well, I like the way that looks. Let me pull these kind of nibs over. And this is a technique, I'm not sure who taught me that, or at least where I kind of took that from. I think it was from an old Western font. And I do that a lot now if I want to create a quick added feature to a font. I'll just add these like little cut-ins. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. I'm just doing it this way because at the time it was just quick. I honestly probably, if I was really into this, I wouldn't have done it this way. But this was, again, just a quick way of doing it. I'm just kind of dragging it down to each one of them. And then I hit, oh, there's a problem, right? So I'm looking at this and I'm like, this isn't going to work. If I do all these little nibs, I got to cut around that curve of the E. So a quick way to fix that is pretty simple. I'm just going to actually drag all of them down a couple pixel points, and boom. I just fixed that problem, right? Of course, you can make it around that E. It would look a little weird, to be honest with you, because I knew it would have. It's not just because I was trying to be lazy here. If I kept it in, or at least shaped it around that curve, it looked like it was pointing up, and it would kind of screw with the negative space of the back side of the E. So the R, again, going to change that because I know that there's a problem there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that extra shape. It wasn't supposed to be there, and it was a remnant from the 2 circles that I'd put there. So just use your negative pen tool and go ahead and point those, take those out. And the negative pen tool works really, really well if you want to simplify things. So keep that in mind. I don't know what the actual name for it. I just called the negative pen tool. So sorry if there's Illustrator purists that are watching this and are screaming at their screens. You probably shouldn't be watching it anyways. So to be fair, you're a professional illustrator and you don't care what I do, right? So again, just drag it on down, hold shift, and again, I'm just kind of refining it as I go. Realistically, when if I was doing this right now, or not experimenting, it would be a much more clear image, and I wouldn't be just kind of just sliding it down on each one. So again, gonna keep going, and this is a good time to talk to you about my sponsors. I'm sponsored. No, I'm kidding. I don't have any sponsors. Are you crazy? I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't even know if anyone's listening to this at this point. You probably gave up and moved on to something else. But I hope you're still with me. I certainly like doing these, and I hope you get a lot from them. And I mean, I understand that it's not for everyone. So, but keep in mind, don't give up. You can do it. Trust me. Again, I had no formal training in any of this stuff. I went to college at a time when nobody was teaching me calligraphy or typography or anything. They kind of just showed you the basics, and you learned your baseline and some ligatures, and that was kind of it. But I created all this stuff and techniques just from looking at the masters. So again, don't just rely on the internet. Sometimes you got to keep in mind that the internet is a beautiful thing, and it's a great way to learn, and I learned a ton of things. But sometimes actually looking at a book really, really does help. So again, speaking of ligatures, look at this little guy. Look at what I'm trying to do here. So what I'm doing is I'm moving those 2 circles to create a perfect kind of sharp angle there, using the cutout and throwing it in there. And I love the way that that looks. But then again, I came to the same conclusion, which is I don't think it'll work with this font. I think this font looks really well just with the single fixed width, and not kind of adding too much to these and bringing them in. So just bringing those little nibs or spikes. I should probably Google what those things are called. I actually don't know. Let's just call them nibs. I like that. I like the term nibs. But you can experiment with those too. Sometimes what I do is I make the negative shape of that nib, and I flip it around, and it kind of creates like a cut in to the shape, so it gives it kind of a unique little flavor there if you want to try that. And again, you can try it on both sides. You can try it on just one side and experiment with it, and then, oh, look, I got to bring that W down because I knew that was a problem there. And it just takes time. This is, if I sped this up, you guys wouldn't really get the kind of minutia of creating, the kind of the drag of creating fonts. I think this type of work does help people sometimes because it shows you how slow it can be sometimes. And again, I'm showing you a little bit how to kind of cut that out. Either you can use the eraser, flop, and there you go, and you cut it right off. I love that. It's like a skill saw that cutting through wood. So I don't know why. It's just something about using the eraser I use constantly when I'm doing illustration and type design. So you get used to using it. I think it's just E, right? Yeah, I think it's just E on your keyboard. But Right now, while I'm doing this, I'm actually using a tablet, and that you're probably like, why are you using a tablet? I feel it helps me a lot, move around, and when I work fairly fast. I am taking my time with this, but usually I work a lot faster than this, and I knew I was going to record it, and so I am kind of just slowing things down a little bit, but I work fairly quickly when I'm doing type design because I can kind of see what's going on. So now I like it. Everything's kind of good, and I'm going to expand it out and then merge everything together and select just the black, copy and paste, delete the kind of extra garbage that's left over, and then as you can see, I'll switch back and forth and toggle from outline view to make sure that everything looks good. And you see me kind of moving things around, and I'm like, this looks okay in my head. And then I'm like, you know what? This is going to look beautiful stacked. So let's throw these on top of each other. And now this kind of section is done, and we're moving on to the next section, which is discovery and experimenting. So now we've kind of, experimenting, not discovering, experimenting. But we're moving on to, kind of experimenting with how I want this to feel in the real world. Now that the font looks good, I like the way that the letters work together. I'm going to really try to figure it out. So I basically love the way this looks, and I feel like it looks like a real cool skateboard brand type of thing. So I'm going to highlight the whole thing, and again, I'm going to keep a fresh copy up there in the corner hidden away so that I don't mess anything up. And you're going to use your alignment tools a lot at least when I do this, I use my alignment tools a lot. So align objects up in the corner there is going to be used constantly. And right now you can see me just kind of, I'm basically doing the kerning now. This is my final shape. This is my final font. So I'm really trying to figure out how these all kind of fit together. And I want to make sure that it works. It reacts with each one of the negative space, and each letter form works together. And I think that's the difference between a lot of other type designers. They might just throw it all together, put it up, and then they're done. And I'm kind of generalizing that. There are some beautiful type designers that are way better than I am, but again, that's what they do. That's their thing. And so a kind of cool way to make a italicized font, just go ahead and use skew. That's a fun little tool to use. Use skew, slide it over a little bit, and boom. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you why I'm doing that, because I know I'm going to add a drop shadow to this whole thing. So I'm kind of skewing it up to the corner a little bit, and I'm going to show you why I just did that. So right now, select the whole thing, all of it, and see how I just copied and pasted behind. I stroked it out, and I got to stop saying stroked it out. I know you guys are probably laughing every time I say it. So just basically increase that stroke, make it black, or I'm making it black so that I can see it better, but you can make it whatever color you want. And this is in the background. As you can see, as I highlighted it, I made the white in the front so it pops off. And then use that stroke. Do the same thing again. I basically expanded it and then grabbed the outer line, and that kind of creates your whole inner shape. So now that I have that, drag it down, copy and duplicate. Hold shift while you're doing it so it goes down in a perfect 45-degree angle. And then use the blend tool and hit on them steps and go ahead and put in, I'm gonna probably put 1,000. No, okay, there we go. Yeah, about 100 usually works pretty well depending on what you're doing. Sometimes it can bog down your system if you use 5,000, because it's basically creating a layer and a layer and a layer, and that's what blend tool does. It'll blend all of that together. So use the blend, you pop it out, and look at that. That's done. I mean, that looks awesome to me. But I'm gonna really refine it. So right now I kind of want to create it like, I want the effect to look like those shapes really pop out and they're full. And so I'm gonna create these little kind of spiked corners. And again, you just use the edges there, hold down shift, and it'll create a perfect 45-degree angle downward if you hold shift while you're kind of cutting in with the pen tool. And that's a great way to do it. I mean, it's really simple. Again, none of these things I'm doing are revolutionary by any means. And if you found my video and you're like, you know, oh, he's just copying so and so or this type designer, yeah, I probably am. I'm not hiding that from anyone. You know, I don't know. I probably saw it somewhere and was like, oh, this is cool, and kind of just learned it. A lot of my stuff, I look at old ephemera and you know, old type design, and I kind of just pull information from that. I don't think there's anything wrong with pulling inspiration from vintage type or you know, anyone. I don't think there's anything wrong with pulling inspiration from people. There's very few people that create things perfectly from scratch. There's quite a few type designers and quite a few illustrators that will willingly talk about how they just consume content all the time, because it really is a motivator for when you're trying to motivate yourself and the creative block is there. And so when that happens to me and I'm doing type design, I pull out one of those solo books and I start just pulling through it and seeing what's in there. And this was one of them. I don't remember which off the top of my head, but it was a technique that a lot of these types of old school type designers and typographers used. And when you zoom out, you get kind of the idea of what I was trying to do there, which makes it look like that whole type is pulled through the whole thing. Now I get it. This isn't the only way to do this type of stuff. You can use 3D and pull it out with 3D, and you can do it that way. I just prefer this way. I think it looks a lot nicer and I can control it a lot better. I know that sometimes with 3D and you use rotate and bevel with some of this stuff, and it can kind of get wonky sometimes, and I don't love it. You know, with this, everything's nice and smooth and clean, and I really love that part of it. And I'm not saying you can't obtain that with 3D. I have before, and sometimes when you're dealing with a client that really needs it quickly and doesn't want to pay you for this kind of extra work, using 3D rotate and bevel is really helpful. So experiment with that too. I won't in this video, but please do. It actually is a really powerful tool. And again, I want to kind of pull a little space away from the edges of those. So just take that white, the white top typeface, and then copy behind and stroke black around it, and it gives you a nice shadow over that, and everything's perfect, and you don't need to redraw all those perfectly. And again, you know, somebody might be like, why are you telling us all your secrets? Truthfully, a master artist that I met years and years ago told me something, which he had a bunch of apprentices. Apprentices. Wow, I can't say that word. Apprentices. And he told me something, and he's actually long dead now, but I asked him the same question. I was like, why are you telling people, why do you have apprentices that you're teaching these things to? And he goes, I wouldn't be a master if I didn't come up with new ways of creating these things, if I didn't come up with new secrets. And that always kind of stuck with me. I always thought it was a cool saying, and so I kind of just continued on that with my life. And I always share things. I never want to feel like I'm these are techniques that are freely available if you want to sit down and watch them. I've tried to find a lot of this stuff online, and I haven't really found a tremendous resource for this type of work, which is like, it's kind of different. It's skateboard, surfy, modern, graphic, and there's tons of guys that do it, but not a lot of guys that talk about it. So, or girls. I don't mean guys in any sort of mean way. I know that there are a ton of great women illustrators out there, especially type designers that are doing amazing work. But so again, I'm copying that, throwing it over, and this kind of has a cool, like, Superman-y comic book feel to it too, which I'm kind of vibing on, and so I like that. So a blend tool coming up again. I'm gonna take a white white rectangle, drag it down, duplicate it, and hit the blend tool. If you hit Option Command B, that's when the blend tool comes up, and you can specify how many steps you want to do. Hit the preview, and boom, there you go. I'm going to use more on this one because you're going to see what I'm going to do with it, which is, you know, kind of a technique that I use a lot, and it's quite common in the old ephemera typography, or the old map typography. If you've ever seen map typography, they use this a lot, which is just the kind of constant creation of lines. And I'm going to line that whole grid up behind it, and what I want to do is give the effect that you see how all those are working together. And that's why I copied that other one, because I liked the sharp shapes, but I wanted to use a full background of lines perfectly in shape. And that is another reason why you held shift when you copied that whole background, because when you do that, it creates that 45-degree angle and makes this a lot easier, especially when you're using the blend. Again, you're rotating that whole the blend tooled object, the lines there. Hold shift and rotate, and it's again at a 45-degree angle perfectly, so you don't have to worry about, you know, kind of jiggering that around until you get to a certain point. And you know, this didn't work out. I didn't love the way that it looked in the end, but this is kind of the great part of you joining me on this experiment and this experimental stage. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes this does work beautifully too. I just, at the time, just didn't quite see how it fit. And I knew I didn't want to spend too much time on it. I could have probably made it work. I just, again, just didn't want to spend an eternity working on it. And I didn't mind this, but again, it just didn't quite work. So I ended up deleting it and trying something different, which is, you know, just a part of the experimental stage. So right now I'm trying to kind of figure out what I should do, and I'm just duplicating again. I'm pulling that white all the way at the top, and I'm gonna transition out, and again I'm gonna stroke that top layer, use the rounded corners because that's always kind of helpful, and then stroke, and then look at my music here and move over here. So stroke that whole thing out and highlight it, and then delete the outer layer. And that's the best way to do it that I've found. I don't know if there's other ways of doing it, to be honest with you. I just like this way. I don't know if it's therapeutic or what, but it's nice to destroy things in Illustrator. I certainly love doing that and deleting things. But just go ahead and delete all the outer strokes. Oop, I moved that O a little bit. And then delete them out. And that is another technique that I learned completely by myself, which is, it's a great way of getting that inner circle, is to stroke it out and get that inner circle. And you can do it a couple different ways with strokes. I just prefer this way. Again, it's just a personal preference. Experiment with it. Find your own way of doing it. And right now what I want to do, because I love that really clean vector feel to it, is I'm going to kind of create these little arches in here. And you're going to see what I'm going to do with it, which is, you know, I'm going to cut this whole bottom section out, which creates this really cool, almost metallic look when you're doing type like this and you're only using two colors, which, you know, in my world, there are designers out there that use a million different colors, and it looks beautiful, but I deal with a lot of t-shirts and apparel, excuse me, and they don't want a ton of colors or logos, and they don't want a lot of like variants and things like that. So you got to kind of get creative when you only have one or two colors to choose from, and especially excuse me, especially when you're Jesus, sorry about that, everybody. Especially when you're doing these types of that type of work, you really want to make sure that you're keeping that in mind, that the client might not want a bunch of different things, and there you go. I mean, that's why I wanted to do it. It looks cool, and if you use a clipping mask, which is how I created that, you basically use the shape, create a clipping mask, and you can change those colors to whatever you want. And I didn't really love the arches, so I'm going to come in there and create it a little bit differently and copy it in front, and then boom, I reversed that whole thing by just making one side black, throwing that black rectangle inside the clipping mask. And again, if you don't know what clipping mask is, just go ahead and Google it in Illustrator, and I'm sure there's a ton of YouTube videos about it. I don't want to get bogged down with exactly everything, but it really helps when you're kind of creating this type of typography work. And I'm just going to keep going along. I mean, the nice thing at this stage is that you're really just playing around. There's a big problem that I'm seeing a lot with people is just giving up. And if I had given up when I started this font and said, it didn't come out the way that I wanted, I never would have gotten to this point. And so sometimes it's just powering through. And I can tell you there has been plenty of times when I've powered through on a project and it didn't come out right. But I can tell you that I've never powered through a project and I didn't learn anything. Even if it's that you learn that you don't like that style, or you're not good at it, or it just didn't come out the way that you had envisioned inside of your head, that's okay too. That is a learning, that's part of learning too. So keep that in mind. Right now I'm doing the exact same thing I was doing on the winter typography, and I know that I like the black being on the bottom, so I'm just arcing those out and then throwing this in the clipping mask layer. So as you can see, when I open that out, there's just those two black and whites in there, and all I'm doing is just putting them back and then resizing and sliding that that bottom arcs in there. And the nice thing about doing it this way is that you're not really destroying too much. The clipping mask is a really great way, especially in Illustrator, to create effects without really destroying anything. I usually use a lot of layers. This one I kind of knew where I was going, so and that's the great thing about as you get a little bit older and more matured and developed in your style, you can kind of see where things are going to go. And I definitely knew what I was doing. Also, you see me not really caring too much about the negative space, those lines, as I'm kind of curving them. I just know that each curve inside the black letter forms needs to be a certain shape to make it look nice. And it kind of gives like a metal, you'll kind of see it here at the end what it looks like, but it gives like kind of metal shiny 80s vibe, which again, I just kind of dig. And I don't really have necessarily a reason why. I just think it's cool. Obviously, I grew up in the 80s, so that's a huge influence on me. But here it is. I'm just going to throw it behind the create a clipping mask by Command 7, I believe. And you just kind of highlight that top layer, which is the winter Reformation typography, and then throw these behind it. And that's it. And I'm just direct selecting each one of those shapes. And then I turn on that bottom layer. And then boom, there you go. And that's pretty much finished. That is literally it. I hope you kind of liked me talking about this and going through each individual step. I hope it made sense, and thanks. As you might be able to tell, that was the end of the video. It was a fun little journey, and I hope you had a good time. Please like and subscribe, which is apparently something you have to say at the end of all these videos. I don't really understand it, but I don't really care if you do anyways, so it doesn't hurt my feelings. I get it. I suck sometimes. But I'm glad that you came along with me. I'm glad that I could share some knowledge. Hopefully there was some really cool information in there for you to really extrapolate and make your project work really great. If not, and you were like, you suck, go ahead and comment too. I don't care. I like it. I like to hear it. Tell me I suck. So let's do this. You're going to subscribe. I'm going to give you more content. You're going to like it. You're going to ask me to do more of these videos, or you're not going to ask me, and I'm still going to do them. But I really do like this. It's a lot of fun. And I'm sorry that you had to listen to my voice again. But I don't know if you can hear it is raining, so it's winding down the end of my day. And I hope you want to do this again with me. All right? Thanks again for sticking all the way through to the end. Down below there is some, you can actually download the file format in PDF if you want to just check it out, drop it in Illustrator and see what it all looks like on a final finished version. Please though, don't steal this stuff. Just, It's just there for you to know what it looks like. Don't sell it or anything. Maybe I'll make a full font one day with this type. I really like it. It's fun. It's a cool, fresh kind of take on a modern Gothic. So I might do that. But right now, just enjoy. Thanks. And again, subscribe. Subscribe.